great panelists here, masters that can help give us information on how to do that effectively. Okay, whether you are an experienced gardener or just beginning, right? From seed to plant to harvest and back again. So please welcome to the stage our gardening panel for today. Welcome.
Good morning. My name is Janet Woodman, and I am the moderator for the gardening panel. And let's start with Robin here.
Hi. How are you? Hi. Hi, Ray. Yes.
Talk about yourself. Why are you on this panel?
I want to talk about me, talk about talk about. No, just kidding.
Give her a microphone.
I've been gardening here in Crestone for 28 years, and I sometimes realize I really must move to Tennessee if I really want a great garden. The challenge, though, keeps calling me back. I am a sustenance hunter and gatherer and gardener, and gardening is the most difficult thing I do in the year to provide food. But that said, I keep working at it, and some years are just fantastic, and other years it's a complete wash. But it's always worth the effort, and every effort you put in each year, whether the product is full, aids and the space and the diversity of your planting and helps you have perhaps better results next year. So being here a long time, I'm going to be very real with you, ask questions about it's not a walk down the garden path in Crestone. And I'll pass it to Bob.
My name's Bob Pedersen. I've lived in Crestone 8 years, but actually just 2 weeks ago moved to Salida and been gardening here the whole time I was here. Previously in Taos for 30 years, gardening and doing community agriculture and free food farms. I don't like selling food. I think food is for sharing, and let's change the whole dynamic around food and develop culture through sharing food. And, and after years of farmer, I realized bother share the food. I do a lot of work with oils and microbial inoculants, and I'm moving towards more understanding and how to develop a carbon, sequestering carbon through certain farming practices, and maybe we'll talk about that a little bit today.
Hi, my name's Stowe Hunter. I grew up west of Loveland in a community called Sunrise Ranch that had an old organic farm, intentional community, and I started farming in 2013 in Fort Collins at Happy Heart. Got into biodynamic farming there and joined an apprenticeship that brought me over to Carbondale, called a farm called Sustainable Settings, and I was there for 3 years, kind of completed a biodynamic apprenticeship there. And we had a raw dairy operation and 90 acres of irrigated pasture, but we also had a CSA market garden. And now I live in Paonia. And I live in Paonia. We have a greenhouse that we're growing in right now, just mostly for ourselves and friends. And I do natural build there primarily. That's most of my work is light straw clay and straw bale building, but love the gardening, saving seeds, a lot of friends who are seed savers, and connecting into that, the soil biota, and a lot of emphasis on the biodynamic preparations, making those and applying those.
Hey, I'm Navona Gallegos, and I'm from New Mexico. I live in Caliente, and I grew up between Santa Fe and New Mexico, which is eastern New Mexico, super dry plains. My family raised grass-fed cattle when I was a kid, so that was sort of the world I was in. And then I went to University of Virginia to study ecology, um, and worked on some farms out there. And then I've studied with Elaine Ingham, and so my passion really is the soil food web and all the organisms in the soil and how they create the whole ecosystem all the way up to us macrofauna. Um, yeah, I'm farming in Ojo Caliente. I just moved to the land I'm on in December, so it's a new project. And yeah, I help other folks with hemp farming, and backyard gardening, and just generally greening and building soil anywhere we can.
Okay, let's start off with some general information. Are there advantages to gardening at 8,000 feet?
Sure, there's advantages in every location is going to have advantages and disadvantages. So maybe here at this elevation, we have the cold winters can help suppress pests. Whereas if you were, in a warmer place where you're pest high, yes, and advantages, disadvantages. I think no matter where you are, it's always a balance. Observe your environment, and you will find a way to make it work, no matter what the environment, I think.
I have a thought on that. It's funny you mentioned Tennessee because I just drove from the East Coast, and while I was in Tennessee, I was like, "Oh my, why am I in the desert? Like, it's so beautiful." But I was also appreciating how clean it is, our environment up here in the high desert. We have way less glyphosate and other pesticides around. We don't have to worry about so much contamination coming through our rain.
Yeah, absolutely. Water quality. And the main thing I think about it, maybe the biggest advantage would be, in my eye, quality of primarily, especially like grasses, but other, in the garden, plants that are stressed will create these secondary metabolites, and forage plants that grow at these higher elevations will have more omega fatty acids that essentially, is against uh, cold temperatures, and those will be converted in animal proteins in our bodies into more chain fatty acids. So the quality of the food that's grown at high elevations is something we've seen, especially in dairy farming, and in the quality of raw dairy at higher elevations.
So the biggest advantage to me is when I get the last jar in root cellar in October, I'm done because we have such a short growing season. So you work like crazy, you get your food put, and you can go to somewhere else. I love that about 8,000 feet.
And what do you see as some of the difficulties in gardening around here?
Okay. How much time do we have? Oh, it's a trip. You have to have venturous spirit to be a gardener at 8,000 feet and higher. Um, it's it's constantly something, especially move just uphill here where the tree line starts, from great big things like bear, elk here, all the way down to this little shrew or mouse. Everything wants what you're growing. We get wasp infestations one year in our bees, and they're all gone. Come back the next year, and the mouse have all moved into the bottom of the hive. You find the rodents in the garden, whole plant crop coming up. That one year we had a mouse plague of biblical proportions, and we could set 5-gallon buckets of water. Here's a good mouse trapping trick. In the garden, and it was a dry years, and we'd had pignon that fall before, and so they would come for the bucket and go in. Sorry if you're an animal lover, but every bucket would have at least 15 or 20 mice. Every morning I had 15 bucks out. No, they just got up because I put it like near a rock. But yeah, I've seen those where you have the thing go woo, like a diving board. That seems a little unkind. Anyway, it was crazy, and all of our gardens up above tree line were decimated by rodents that year. So we just start over. Um, it often sometimes people move here and they want to get started gardening, and I'm always the voice of doom. I feel a little bad about it, but I say don't plant yet. No, no, hey, and sometimes people get kind of mad at me, and I've been working in the community garden right on the way into town for the last 9 years, and a lot of times people won't come because we don't start quick enough for folks. But there have often been times we don't plant until July 1st. And we get a lovely crop, and thank goodness we do by the first week of September, because guess what happens the second week of September? Freeze. We're done, yay.
I'm going to pass for now.
Yeah, my experiences in Colorado, and especially the higher elevations, we are very rich in the fire element and the air element, and it's the earthly element and the water element that we're so stressed with. So that would be the biggest challenge for me. And then you can create this oasis if you have the water, or you have these resilient plants, that you can, these perennials you can get established and start, over time, slowly conditioning the soil and mulching it. And um, but the hardest element too is that you create maybe a little oasis and all the life's attracted to it because there's water and there's soil and there's rich fertility. So yeah, in my experience, the hardest part besides the short growing season and mostly in many parts of Colorado, the lack of water, would be that it's everything wants to everything wants to kind of go to the sky. Everything wants to bolt and just go up, and we really need to work hard with, animal manures or vegetable manures and intelligent use of water to bring everything down into the earth, and to get it well established.
I would add a challenge to gardening in Crestone and perhaps everywhere is people and policies. So we're all familiar with our neighborhood association and our water department. And the water department has to charge a lot of money for that water. And if you're trying to garden in the neighborhood and you're on your own well, you, you do some deep mulching type of techniques, things to conserve water because you're gonna spend some money on water, um, and and the policies that a neighborhood association created was not thinking about that this is an isolated community that might need to grow a certain amount of its own food, and to change those policies it is going to take all of us to change those policies because people have been trying to change those policies for decades, and restrictions on on greenhouses, restrictions here, restrictions there. There's not much in there to enhance and encourage what I really feel community need and to develop culture around gardening, agriculture can develop organically, but there's some things that are um, built into the policies here that make it difficult. And I'll leave it at that because those of you who live here know what I'm talking about.
So on that note, I'll just mention that for the first 4 years I lived here, a group of us who were building our own homes and growing our own food and hunting were very active to sequester some of that water right on the golf course and actually have community gardens out at the golf course. It didn't launch. Things kept getting in the way, but I just wanted to drop that bug in your ear because now could be the time. Oh, yeah? Jeff saying, how much food can you grow with 1.12 acre feet of water per acre? Yeah, that's a good question. It's a lot of water. Yeah, 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 exactly. And it's such an excellent idea. And we could still play disc golf, and Steve Storm could still have his 9 holes. It would be fine. Oh, yeah.
You know, okay, let's say there's 1,000 people in our community. I think that's a little high. Uh, okay, 1,000 people. And just pretend we wanted to grow all of our food here, and let's skip the coffee and the rice, but and things like that. But I, I was been thinking about it prior to this. It's like, okay, if there were 300 square feet of greenhouse for every person in the community, and an eighth of an acre for every person in the community, we need 20 acres of greenhouses and about 400 acres of open land. So just get your mind around how little food we actually grow here, even though lots of us are growing food. We are a very isolated community. I got into growing food when a boulder fell into Taos Canyon about 30 years ago. And within 3 days, there was no shelves. And yes, the trucks would have eventually gone around a different route, but 3 days supply of food. We have about a 3-day supply of food in this community. And should or when the trucks stop rolling, our little community gardens are not going to cut it. So developing relationships with our farms, that amount of water could, through drip irrigation, certain techniques, could probably take care of about half of our food needs um, uh, for the community.
Thanks.
Wow. Half of them. And that's after a lot of work and a lot of arranging and a lot of planting and weeding and so forth. Phew. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and water installation. Yeah, that's a lot. And Stone mentioned something about everything wanting to bolt. And I wanted to tell you this morning, going out into my garden, I found a beet plant that was bolting. And I'd never seen that before. I don't know if any of you have seen a blooming beet plant. Anyway, let's see. On our conversation before this talk, mentioned the brain response to garden smells.
Oh,
Can you
yes.
talk?
Okay. So I'm sure we've all been out in the forest, in deep forest, and that feeling you get when you're walking in the forest, um, that's microbes that you're smelling. That's healthy soil, and um, the what one of the questions on our pre-little list was about, like, what I can't remember exactly, but some, what well, it's an addiction, and it's an addiction to like it that smell is antidepressant. It changes your brain waves. It causes your body to want more of it. And I I I garden for that. And healthy soil, you can smell it. Healthy microbial teas, when you have a good batch. Compost, when it's good from the smell. And if you take a smell of really healthy soil, you can feel your brainwaves shift. Is that the answer that you're looking for? Anybody else want to say anything on that?
Yeah, I guess I'd just add that we have more fungal and bacterial cells in our bodies than we do human cells. There's more DNA that's not human DNA. And so really what our environment is what we're made of. The soil microbes are a lot of the same microbes who populate our digestive system. And then those microbes are informing our hormones, our cognition, they create our cravings, they create serotonin, all the different types of serotonin. And so, yeah, having the inoculant, whether we're eating it or even smelling it, can totally change our experience of life.
Yeah, I just wanted to say the other side of that too then is also maybe, it's not human DNA, these other, but it's in us, right? So it is human. And so when we encounter it in the forest, it's like we're encountering an aspect of ourselves, right? Outside of a relative, so it is very addictive and it builds a type of understanding, like an embodied somatic experience of what healthy soil feels like, and then you'll just strive to get other people to be more like that, and to bring in what you need and cultivate it so you can get back to that richness.
So we talk a lot about soil additions and creating good soil, but one advantage we do have here in the first couple years of trying to get gardens started, pretty much this is a lot of what you have out in the Baca and in our community garden at the entrance to town. But an interesting thing was happening with enough water, the plants were growing well. And I was looking at that thinking, oh, it's not strawberries that like sand, things are doing good. And what I realized after just messing around with some of the geology of the area is our sand here is incredibly mineral rich. It is feeding those plants all kinds of great things. So if you kept the water and you did a diversity of planting, lots of things all mixed up, which is why I actually like plants to bolt. I let some bolt because I get lettuce or anywhere I wouldn't have planted them the next year, which is pretty cool. But this is an advantage. So if you're working really hard to create soil in a garden bed you want to start, or have too much, you can have too much good stuff sometimes. Get some of this sand and mix it in with your mixture. It actually is a benefit.
Okay. What advice would you give to someone starting a garden here?
Really want to. Yeah. And don't depend on it. If you need a backup, because it's quite irregular and it isn't always, it's like hunting. There's no guarantee. You do the best you can. And a lot of times, as you mentioned, the competition of all other life forms gets in your way. So a long time ago, I decided I want to have a garden. It just does my soul well. I like to work hard, so I don't mind that part. I'm looking as I get older for easier ways to garden. I'm experimenting this fall, setting up for next year, a little culture. I want to give it a try. I've heard good things about it. Water is easier. I haven't done it before. I told myself I couldn't do it till I learned how to pronounce it. But anyway, yeah, just go for it. Talk with people who are gardening a lot. Janet, Kizen, Mady Bell, you have beautiful gardens. Lots of people here have some really, Jacob and Christy Pesqueira, they have an amazing culture garden they put, Terranian, very cool. Find some folks who are doing it. Everybody's going to be happy to have your help and have you come look.
I was going to say, don't only ask questions, but offer to help.
Bring a shovel.
Bring a shovel.
Everyone wants to talk about gardening. We've been trying to do gardening co-op, the people. They sit and talk and no one brings the shovel.
Yeah.
I'm going to go a little tangent around hugelkultur, which people are really excited about. I think it's similar to permaculture, hugelkultur. It's a movement. But think about where did it come from, and where are you? You're in the desert. Hugelkultur is a German word from Germany, where they get 60 inches of rain. Is building a mound with logs and manure and straw and compost under it really the right thing here? You're going to have to water your mound. Where in the places where it was invented, it rains so much that you want a mound to take a little bit of the moisture away, and it's going to get down into that mound, everything down. So I wonder, Hugo is like people say, oh, I'm doing a Hugo culture mound. That's like saying I'm doing a mound. I don't know German, but that's what the word kind of means. It's a mound. Um, what's the German word for a pit? Or um, what? There is a word for it. See, so around here, consider making a pit. And I want to tell you about a garden that I did at my house. I have a bobcat, so I can do this. I dug 3 foot pit, 3 foot deep pit, and in rows. I added logs, horse manure from my neighbor whose truck I just bought, and then some straw, some leaves, and some compost, and then some of my inoculant, and then I put soil on top of it, but it was only 3 inches above the ground, and then I drip irrigated on top of that. Um, I just moved from Crestone, but in that garden, so I didn't plant a garden in that space, but a stray marijuana plant came up. I did not water it all year. It's 8 feet tall, and it was not watered because the few rains that we got, and I and now I'm going to transition to what advice would you give? Take a year at least and observe your environment. Maybe plant a little something, don't have any expectations. Observe what happens to the plantings and learn from it. Watch the animals, learn from the animals. The birds tell me a lot about this, and the birds literally change their tune when certain things are going to happen, and figure out for yourself what that means. But take a lot of time, because otherwise you're going to put out and I have done this for years and years in my youth. Just try and fight. Observe your environment is what I would say. And for example, now in where are we? We're in the desert, so maybe not Hugo culture, but how about the Red Willow people of Taos? What do they do? They farm. The Hopi, what do they do? Zuni, people probably heard of waffle gardens, right? So that's kind of a little depression and not a mound.
Will you say the word again?
Gruben culture.
So in fact, that's why I use the word subterranean, because we're doing this exact thing, but it's underground, and Jacob only waters every 3 days.
Right. And the Hopi would plant, my understanding is they'd plant the seed at least a foot and a half deep, you know, and that's because that's where it's at. So it really does make sense. We need to invert. We need to invert a lot of the gardening culture, even that Elliot Coleman might talk about or something, to our environment that came from the old country and came from the eastern states. I guess just my advice would be, yes, I love the observe, and also start something, and keep it manageable. Small steps, a small planter box, a little raised garden bed. Just start to feel the soil. Make your little composting bin. I just do pallets, just 2 bays, one to build up, and then let it rest while I build up the other one. Build your compost. Take your garden scraps out there. You have to water it in Colorado, give it some water, give it some shade, give it your carbon, give it some nitrogen with those scraps. Also give it soil, inoculate it 10 to 15% of your local soil so those microbes can get in there and start to decompose it, and water it, and build a little screen, get some mesh and screen that out the next year for a soil, to make your own compost and start to feel like that attuned to, like, wow, this is rich, this is what plants will love, and then you can mix that into just your little garden bed and grow from there. And the last piece I would say is networking. Absolutely, learning so much from amazing gardeners in the community. Go visit them, offer a hand, and also network them, connect people for each like little nodal points, and you may know someone who has a resource that would greatly benefit them, and then you can also gather those resources maybe you know someone who has some sheep and you can collect some manure from them, someone who has some old hay and you can gather that. I was told once, when you get a new property, the first thing you really should get is a trailer because there's a lot of free resources out there and you need to be able to bring those resources in. So networking with different people and then also finding those resources, because we really need to just be more functional like mycelium to distribute what's already available.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess I'm going to echo a lot of what y'all said, but yeah, I think number one is observing, and so we're always doing that. And then, yeah, it's never too soon to start the compost. So my favorite compost is a Johnson Sioux compost, and I have a hunch we'll probably talk about compost a little bit more, so I won't get into a lot of detail about it. But yeah, right away, just get the compost going, whether it's a Johnson Sioux compost or thermophilic or um, vermipost or something to get the organisms going, because they're really the ones who build the soil. And so all these things that we're talking about that are challenging in this environment or any environment are mitigated by soil organisms who want to have they have the same goal as you, and that's what they're working towards all day every day. And so if we just create an environment for them, starting with the compost, then they're going to help us out a lot. And if we have a really good inoculant, that can put us years and years ahead, as opposed to not so great inoculant or no inoculant. So yeah, starting with the compost, and then I'm a huge fan of doing the pit situation. I've had a similar experience of digging a deep pit in really hard clay in eastern New Mexico and filling it with wood and straw and compost and just a diversity of different materials, and then some, maybe it was about 50% of the native dirt, and growing some hemp to breed and leaving it and not watering it this year. And a bunch of the seeds that fell in that pit are now taller, and we haven't been watering it at all, which is nuts because in Tucumcari it's 110 degrees all day every day through July and August. So I'm actually really surprised, and it just speaks to the power of the soil organisms in that compost, able to hold water and create a functional soil right there. Whereas the rest of the hemp fields that we did 7 acres the year before last, before we let it stop this year because we didn't have irrigation water in the district. There was plenty of seed that was dropped there, and there are no volunteers whatsoever. So yeah, starting with the compost, and then I think just having observing the land and doing sort of the immediate solution, which is this organic matter rich garden situation that you can use for your kitchen garden. And then at the same time, starting to work with the land around you and do some of the more slow soil building practices like mulching. Like you don't want any soil. And so that's one of the first things I like to do is just cover the soil. And that can also be a process of observation and looking at the contour of the land. But yeah, just thinking about different ways that we can cover the soil and just start to hold that water, slow it, sink it, spread it.
I just want to add too, in topography in permaculture, we talk about these scales of permanence and topography and and just plan as we were talking water, right, and how precious water is, and really want to emphasize, gray water systems, that if we can divert, the water from our sinks, from our showers out into a dug in, say a dug in swale that's deeply mulched and stuff, we could use every drop of that, and that will get into the ground table, and yeah.
And I need to mention our composting style. We have a 3-year compost system where the first year we just pile stuff up. We don't water it, we don't turn it, we just accumulate stuff. The second year, we put a soaker hose over the top and plant Hubbard squash there. And so that will give some water to the compost. The third, we take it and we put it on our beds and start plants with it. So it seemed like a good use of water. But I like that gray water idea. I use biodegradable um, soap for washing the dishes every morning, and then I take the pan out and dump it on our household plantings. So let's see. There was some mention of carbon sequestration. Shall we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. You right away.
I did. Did I say? I don't know if I said that word. I have a really interesting relationship to that term because it meaning carbon sequestration. Literally, it has this gesture to me of like capturing it's like we're kidnapping, we're holding this carbon for ransom, and so there is an element definite of maybe I just want another carbon gathering, carbon forage, to carbon partnering. Um, so I'm not sure. Definitely, we're talking about mulching. We're talking about getting the roots established in the ground. So when you're talking about going slow, some of our biggest allies in this dry, arid climate are the weeds, right? And are incredibly strong plants. Even yarrow, or I mean, I love yarrow, but I'm thinking of alfalfa, right, which isn't really thought of as a weed, but the roots on an alfalfa plant, when you dig it up, they're like 3 feet deep, sometimes more. And so, how can we just start to, on a broader scale, allow? I would say maybe the biggest piece for me in terms of the relationship to the soil in that sense is start to identify and just get to know these plants that are and some of the most incredible soil building plants that we have, even the bindweed, the mallow, so amazing. And get to know them and understand some of their medicinal uses, consume them, take them, make tea synthesis out of them, and build that relationship so you can recognize them and you can also start to see what they're telling you about the condition of the soil. Thistle growing, it's like very compacted, the burdock that's coming in. So yeah.
In relation to bindweed, what what do you do with bindweed? I mean, I've learned to use it as a mulch, and I'm just fine with the bindweed in my garden. But were you suggesting there's another medicinal use for it?
For bindweed, I'm not so sure. Maybe someone could help me. But I also know for bindweed, a lot of people will make because they don't want it, make a maceration out of it. A lot of times, it's kind of this gesture of like the soil needs something and the earth needs something, and she sends up this volunteer. And if we can take that message and amplify it, maybe that succession can happen more rapidly. So we can take the bindweed and make a slurry and spray it over the whole area. So everywhere is getting some of that. We've also used like stinging nettle. We make a stinging nettle preparation and we'll spray that where there's a lot of thistle, because the thistle and the stinging nettle are bringing in this similar gesture, right? And the iron accumulation, the decompaction that the nettle really helps with. So as an analog, so that's kind of my piece is compost it. To get it into your compost, because then the soil will get what it wants.
Oh, I was just cheering about the idea of using the bindweed as a living mulch. I do the same thing. I love the bindweed. I found that I have the healthiest hemp plants if they're surrounded by bindweed, and it's an amazing ally for pollinators. It blooms when a lot of other folks don't bloom. And as far as medicinal uses for it, I'm really intrigued. I haven't experimented with this yet, but it is a morning glory relative. So gathering the seeds and experimenting with that might be some avenue of making bindweed more interesting to us. um, yeah, so as far as carbon goes, building soil is sequestering carbon. If we're building healthy living soil, then we're drawing carbon into that soil. And the main way that that happens is through photosynthesis, because the plants draw carbon out of the atmosphere and they turn it into sugars that then they feed into the soil food web through the roots. And that carbon becomes the bodies of all the fungi and the bacteria. and all the structures that the fungi and the bacteria make, and all the other organisms like the protozoa and the nematodes, and everybody in the soil is made of carbon. And that carbon comes from the atmosphere through the miracle of photosynthesis and the sun's energy and plant roots. And so one of the main ways that carbon is sequestered in soil is in fungal bodies with the mycorrhizal fungi, who partner with plant roots and exchange sugars for water or micronutrients or macronutrients. And then also through the decomposer fungi, who we create in compost. So we can't grow mycorrhizal fungi in compost because they need a living plant root, but we can aid in the carbon sequestration through composting because we make an environment where more plants can grow, and so they can be doing the photosynthesis more abundantly. And then also the decomposer fungi create these incredible structures called humic substances, and these are these long chain carbon. They're actually, I believe, the longest, most complex carbon-based, organic carbon-based structures on the Gaia, and they're really, really stable. And so these humic substances last thousands and thousands of years, and that's how we can get the carbon into the soil. And so at first, carbon is cycling in soil, and there's, birth and death, and soil organisms will also respire, and so some carbon goes back out into the atmosphere. But the way that we start to get a positive carbon bank is by getting those humic substances built by the fungi, and those humic substances are super stable, and they feed the soil food web, but they also sit there as a reserve in our old growth forests and our meters of topsoil plains that we used to have. And that's how we can have gigatons of carbon in an acre.
I'm very interested in carbon sequestration, but to maybe go off of what you're saying. No, I'm so right. The movement around carbon sequestration is also a movement around solving climate change. And well, it's not up to us to. We're not. I have problems with those phrases too. It's like we're not going to solve climate change. Climate is what it is. We're affecting it, but the push to solve it is something doesn't feel right about that. And it's more of it's human change that needs to happen. And I'm not even sure that that to push in that direction is something fundamental around our culture that if it shifted, we wouldn't be worrying about uh, carbon sequestration or climate change. We would just be living a little gentler on the land. But now we do have a problem. There are, now I'm speaking to the other side. There is a global problem with too much carbon in the atmosphere, and there's techniques to draw that carbon back into the soil. And I think you mentioned the Midwest and the soils there. Well, the soils of the Midwest used to have deep reservoirs of carbon, that deep soil. As soon as we invented the plow and started flipping it, and they got great yields for year after year, but it released all that carbon, and that's in the atmosphere. And there's and then all the vehicles that we drive, we're all part of the problem, but we can all be part of the solution too. And now that soil in the Midwest or anywhere that has released all that carbon, it's anxious to draw it back down. If we put ourselves, and we are, right between the earth and the sky, and we use our intelligence, which is I think what we're here to do, between the earth and the sky, we can do a few little subtle things with technology or just with some very basic farming techniques to help draw that soil or that carbon back into the soil. And there's biochar, I believe. I think I see a biochar model over here, and biochar is a great sequestration tool. But don't get too excited about biochar uh, without going a little deeper into how is that char made. If you're making biochar and you're just releasing the exhaust into the air, and you're left with a char of wood that maybe has a 20% humic value, that and most of it just got released, and then you're going to put the remainder back in the soil for a little bit of benefit. It's not a really strong model, but carbon biochar that captures the gases through the pyrolysis, I believe it's called, where you're heating without in the absence of oxygen, and those gases are useful for running. You can run a motor on it, and I think they might have something set up like that right over there. And now you're trapping it. And now if you burn that gas and then capture, if you burn it clean, all you're getting is heat, water vapor, and CO2. Now grab that CO2 and run that CO2 through algae, and algae grows 4 times faster with some CO2. So bubble it through algae. Now take that algae and eat it, or use it as a plant nutrient or as an animal feed. So closing all the loops. So just biochar alone is not it's not going to do it unless you're capturing it all. But there are so many new techniques available, and there's so much work being done. The IPCC, international organization, is like trying to figure out how do we account for carbon? What what techniques are actually working, and what is not? But one of the advantages of having carbon in the soil, or using even a mined rock humate, is going to have a better overall carbon sequestration than biochar that is not, where you're not capturing the gases, because it's 75, 60, 75% carbon. Uh, and what carbon, it's a catalyst. In other words, microbes use it to have lots of activity, but it doesn't degrade the carbon itself. It degrades it a little bit, but it's considered a catalyst because it catalyzes microbial activity, which then helps release nutrients from other elements in the soil, which makes plants grow better. Plants are the thing that's pulling the carbon back into the soil. I'm going to stop there.
Thank you. One thing I want to mention, just kind of bring us back down to making a garden before it starts to sound too complicated, is we're talking about gardening more than we're talking about farming. And there's so much we can do if we keep things simple, and if we keep things on a level of effort that we can sustain. Everyone wants to talk about sustainable agriculture, but they forget the part that fails often is the human workforce, because we make a project much too big and we go over the top. You alluded to that earlier. This year, I started doing something I've never done before, and I'm just really pleased with it because it's been an incredibly busy summer with classes for EarthNAC, and I started container gardening. I've never really done that, but I did it with everything up at EarthNAC, not in the community garden. And I'm using a lot less water. I'm doing a lot less work. I'm having a lot of fun placing the pots and being artistic. And I can just move them anywhere I want. If I need a little more sun or I need a little more water, I just take them over. I can't do that out here on the T road. So there's lots of things we can do to keep our efforts simple at first. And I planted an orchard 30 years ago here at EarthNet, and I started it all in pots and mulched them into berms through the winter. And now I have these beautiful trees and can a lot of fruit. Of course, as you said, you like the free food program. I call my fruit trees the Feed the Wildlife program. Don't tell the DOW I said that term, but they know. They've just come and looked at everything. Anyway, they were here first. I made that choice. They get all they want. There's always a little, well, not always, but sometimes a little left for me. But when you take on doing so much, like creating an orchard in this environment or doing these large gardens, you set yourself up for burnout pretty quick. Keep it fun, keep it small, inch by inch, row by row, gonna make this garden grow.
Okay, is there any topic that any of you would like to talk about that we haven't covered yet?
Rooftop gardens. It's awesome. Do it.
I guess I have a couple other thoughts on this carbon and that whole thread. So, what I really love about soil and why it's sort of the focal point that I orient around is um, that all these sort of macro things like climate and ocean acidification, all these large scale things that can be phrased as issues. Um, when we get down to it, it's really just about being ourselves and being our own expression as humans and as organisms and beings here on the Gaia that we get to do for a minute. And so I don't usually, I mean, I guess my ultimate motivation with all of this is really selfishness, because in order to be my fullest expression of myself, I need the community, I need a thriving community of soil organisms and plants and other humans and other animals and all the other beings who are playing with us right now. And so I think it's really cool that the sort of big picture stuff around how we can draw carbon into soil through all these different practices really just boils down to making a more fun, more verdant, more abundant existence for ourselves. And why do we bother doing that? And the reason we want to do that is just because we want to enjoy life more. And so, our gardens don't have to be this, this huge scale type of situation. And I think it's really really beautiful to understand sort of some of the mechanisms that are going on, but that's just my particular orientation towards information. But when we get down to it, we're just wired for healthy ecosystems, and we're wired um, to move towards health. So we love the way soil tastes and soil smells, and if plants are, if our crops are delicious, then that means they're full of nutrition, and so they're good for us, and so that's what we want to lean towards. And yeah, that's really where we're headed with all of this, is just more enjoyment of life.
Well said indeed. Yeah, I would say on that piece of motivated by taste, absolutely. And the other side of the addiction, aside from just the love of the soil, really is the taste, and really is, once you eat quality food, it's really hard to yeah, there's no turning back. So, that's a big piece for me, and it's a lifestyle thing, because I'm motivated, because I crave, quality food and quality vegetables and fruit, or meat, and beautiful houses to live in, and so there is a selfishness piece to that, and I just hope that's motivated in that avenue, because there's something wired in us for that vitality. Once we recognize it, once we taste it, we just yearn to find more of it. The one piece I would touch on, we had a question about seed saving. Do you save your seed? And I just wanted to emphasize a similar piece in my garden of letting plants both, letting them seed. I do also like to collect some of, so I can make some trays, but a lot of it self seeds. And I do think there's a duty around market gardening when plants aren't allowed to seed. And maybe this is a little metaphysical, but perhaps, there's a gesture whereby when we're not allowing these plants to fulfill their evolutionary role, Gaia gets tired, and so she's going to put her energy into the wild plants that can fulfill that evolution. So I do feel, for me, part of the seed saving, is, yes, because I want seed and food for later, but also I really want to allow the plants to fulfill their life cycle and to evolve.
They're healthier and more robust, come up where they want to instead of where I want them to.
I would, I would close here I just want to tell you what my experience in my garden was this morning. I have about an eighth of an acre, and it's Taos Pueblo blue corn, which I'm growing for seed, and it's interplanted like a 4 or 5 seeds, 6 or 7 feet apart, interplanted with onions on some rows, and cabbages and broccoli, flowers, I said cabbages, a number of other vegetables. But this morning, I and almost all the time it's on a drip irrigation, but I go out there, it's deep mulched. I go out there with a garden hose, and I'm going to get a little metaphysical. I I enjoy touching the water before it touches the plants. So I go out there with a hose and I water the garden like this, and I do about 4 rows a day. And this morning I was watering the corn and everything right as the sun came up, and a hummingbird was coming around. Like, oh, how neat. It just kept coming. What is it? Oh, it wants water. I'm like, oh, so I'll water the top of the corn plant. And it sat on a leaf right next to me and drank a little bit of water. And I'm anthropomorphizing, I suppose, but this little bird, I'm spraying the water like this, it it would get on the spray of the water and ride the spray like it was a water slide, and then it would come back and do it again. And um, that made my day. It might have made my year. That's why I garden, for moments like that.
So remember, if you take your shovel to Bob's garden, ask questions and help, wear your swimsuit.
That reminds me of a story. This spring that I had, I was out in the garden, I was pulling weeds or whatever. We always have lots of hummingbirds. And this 1 or 2 hummingbirds were dive bombing and going up. And I thought, I wonder if there's a nest around here. Then I did a little research and realized that they eat bugs. And I was attracting all the mosquitoes. And they were cleaning it out. Yeah, they're lots of fun in the garden. Do any of the audience have questions to ask?
Or garden expertise to share.
Or garden expertise? Okay. Okay.
You should let
Greenhouses.
people really take that, but I will give you my 2 cents because that's what I do. I am not, because I have the phone. Yeah. I'm not a fan of greenhouses. Um, like I said, when I put that last canning jar away in the fall, I don't want anything else to grow till July because I'm tired of it. But also, they tend to have a lot of bug infestations and soil problems, and there's a lot of mitigation. And people love their greenhouses and their beautiful little environments, and there's cool things you can do with them. If you're interested in one, there's a lot of great folks here using them, and they could give you good advice. But I love growing the plants in the outdoor air and the outdoor soil with the real wind blowing across them, just like it blows across me. My skin is the way it is because for millions of years we grew up on this planet having that move across us. Our eyes do what our eyes do. For millions of years, light came into them from the outside, dappled or shaded or bright. Everything about us is about being in the outdoor environment 24/7. This machine, this system came that way. It's the same for the plants. They know how to be fully what they are in an outdoor atmosphere, and they evolved their colors, their shapes, their lifestyles, their reproduction in that environment. So that's just my 2 cents.
I can't disagree with anything you said, and yet I love greenhouses. Uh, my parents joked that I love greenhouses because I was a premature baby and I was in an incubator, and that's my natural environment. So, but no, I believe a 3-season unheated greenhouse is a better environment than a 4-season greenhouse because you're creating a vector for the pests, for diseases, and if you've got a little bit of mosquitoes outside, you're going to have an amazingly so many more mosquitoes inside. And yet, I really do like growing in greenhouses. You can start your starts a little early, but if you have a small garden, you can do that in your windowsill. In relation to greenhouses, now let's say you want to build a geodesic dome greenhouse. That is about the most expensive, inefficient structure you could build, but it's full.
It's very beautiful.
But it's not. It's not. If you've got the money, do that. But if you're on a budget, bend your own metal pipe. Um, you know, build a cold frame, maybe add an exhaust fan. But in the winter, perhaps let it cool, let the cold air come in, let it kill out the bugs. Or if you'd like to, in the winter, you want to have your greens. Um, Unheated greenhouses, properly planted at the right timing, you can have spinach all year round. In drop to 10 below zero, and the next day, pick some spinach as soon as it thaws. Lots of greenhouse techniques that will work in the community. Um, Many different methods. Season extension. I like using a greenhouse for extending the season, more of a cold frame than a 4-season type greenhouse. 4-season greenhouses, make them go east and west facing south so the winter light comes real deep and warms your back wall. 3-season greenhouses, make them go north and south so that your crops aren't shading themselves as the sun goes across the sky. And if you want to talk later, I'm happy to chat about greenhouses.
Brilliant, brilliant. Yeah, I can't disagree with anything. I really agree very much. I funnily funny enough, at the property I live at, I don't own it, and it is a geodesic dome greenhouse. So it's just inherited, and it's the space that is available, and so that's what we're growing in right now, because the outside garden space was dug up this year to put in a septic field. But we did have, when I was in Carbondale, we did trials, and you can see the difference between spinach, that was grown outside and that was grown inside. And the outside spinach is dark and rich and lush, and the inside was food, it was edible, and it was good, but it wasn't as good, as rich. So there definitely is an element to think about, in terms of when you cover, when you have this block from the sun. Maybe it's even like sunglasses, maybe to a certain extent. You're shielding, the full spectrum of the nutrients that and the influences that the plants are bringing in. The advantages, definitely. I like the season extension. I also like, how accessible it is to make the beds really new. But mostly, I just like that we have a fig tree in our greenhouse from Jerome Ostentowski, and I'm eating figs, and I'm in there like watering this greenhouse, and it's pretty cool. You can grow figs in a greenhouse in Colorado. You could grow bananas. You could grow lemons. I think that's neat. But yeah, I would just emphasize that hoop houses, simple structures, cold frames, getting a little start, on it. But I also very much agree that I think there's something to attuning to the seasons that we have, and really dropping into those and working those. So I would say if you want to grow with have a greenhouse, cool. Also, I really encourage you to do both. Have an inside and outside garden. That's what I'm gonna try to do more of.
Yeah, I love what you said, Robin. Thank you for that. That's such a beautiful articulation. And I totally agree. And I also like greenhouses, especially for the fruit. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Wallapini greenhouses. So greenhouses that are dug down into the earth and use the earth's stable temperature to keep it stable. If we're doing greenhouses in this part of the world, we really have to think about wind. I've had and known a lot of greenhouses who have been demolished by wind. So yeah, thinking about that. And yeah, I love the season extension. And personally, I enjoy greenhouses because of the just the ecosystem aspect of it, and what you all were talking about with the insects, and then introducing predatory insects and other organisms. I've always fantasized about having a greenhouse with more reptiles. But yeah, I think that you can do it. I mean, you can have a 4-season greenhouse or a 3-season greenhouse, but you can have a 4-season greenhouse that isn't that can stay healthy if you really stay on top of, just keep all those trophic levels of predators and all these different cycles. And, you know, it all boils down to diversity with everything that we're doing. So diversity of plants, diversity of inoculants, diversity of mulches, diversity of animals, insects. Um, but yeah, that's a whole other project. And I think it's in a way more righteous and more infinite and long lived if we can just be with our seasons.
A last image for me is there is an immense tragedy that happens when you get the interspersed rain and you're getting this amazing rain and you're walking outside, or I'm walking outside and I go down and then I look into the greenhouse and it's like, oh gosh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. And I will say I am building a very small subterranean greenhouse with an old piece of play equipment. It's quite small. And we're going to put a kiva ladder in the top instead of making a side entrance. So we're going to call it the Hopi Hot House. But it's just to start some plants and just to finish a few, not to keep it all year long.
Does anyone else have any questions or comments? No? Well, I can.
Oh, absolutely. And it's,
Let me repeat the question.
oh, please. Yeah.
A question about native plants. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Native plant
I'm,
propagation.
I've been forest gardening. I'm so fortunate to have a place where the creek runs through and I have trees. And I've been forest gardening for 28 years. I'm an herbalist for 30 years. I eat the wild food. I teach a business teaching Stone Age living skills. So the wild food is so important. And to just go right after the comment I made about us being outside and the plants growing outside, again, this thing here, this beautiful thing here, evolved on those plants. And when I put that on in me, that's like high octane fuel in a fancy car, right? Everything is right. I will never grow a plant, a piece of spinach per se, that's anywhere near as nutritious or beneficial to my body as wild spinach or laduca or nettles or purslane. The five, top five for absolutely radiant well-being are purslane, dandelion, amaranth, lamb's quarter, and nettle. And the beautiful thing about those plants is we can find them in almost all bioregions. I wonder why.
That's yeah. You know, the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, and then there's the three wild brothers, which are part of the five that you just mentioned there. So the wild the wild food is more nutritious, and if you can identify it, and you might, when it's young in your garden, you might want to pull it out as a weed. Well, let it go a little longer, and you'd be surprised. Purslane, very nutritious, and you know, just start a garden and you'll be have more purslane than you can ever eat.
Yeah, it's amazing when a weeding session turns into a snacking session and you're pulling out some baby lamb's quarters and they're just so delectable and so rich in nutrition. And yeah, so these wild plants, native plants, I I think I think you definitely can bring in, some native species and you could plant them. I think it's really cool to encourage what wants to come up on one side of the spectrum. We go from master gardener, very organized, to like the full permaculture. There's a spectrum here, and we got to honor that different people like to be on different ends of the spectrum for what you like. But yeah. Yeah, from Elliot Coleman to Jerome Ostentowski. um, so yeah, I think probably I would just say the biggest piece is starting to recognize them and get to know them and appreciate them and consume them. And then maybe even understanding some of the relationships that they have, in the wild. and encouraging that, and what kind of habitats they prefer, because a lot of people might be like, oh, I love nettle, and I'm just going to put it out here in the blazing sun, or and just, it's kind of respecting them if you are going to take a plant and even to transplant it or seed it, just to know kind of what environment it likes to have, and then you're going to have a more successful plant anyway. But yeah.
I'm glad you asked that question because I was sitting here thinking about perennials and how we hadn't talked about annuals versus perennials. And yeah, I just really encourage all of us to keep introducing more perennials, especially native perennials, to wherever we are, because if they're native, they're hardy, they're acclimatized. And then from a soil standpoint, perennials build soil faster than annuals because they have a living root in the ground all year long. And they're just great. You don't have to plant them again. I love the berry bushes. I love the currants and the gooseberries and all our trees, like our down in New Mexico. I don't know if you all have the little plums, like the wild plums here, but yeah, they're just so abundant and so incredible. And then you can can them and you can dry them and you can have them all year. And it's way less labor intensive than all the market garden stuff. Um, and just to nerd out a little bit, if we have a second um, on the different types of plants that we eat. So for most of our time as humans, we were mostly eating wild perennials, and the market garden vegetables are mostly brassicas and what we'd call earlier succession species. And so the reason that our European ancestors started to use like the broccolis and the all the other brassicas is because they grow in a more disturbed soil. And so we started eating those as a staple pretty recently in our history. And it's because we were destroying soil through tillage and all these other practices. And I think it would be really beautiful for us to move towards more perennials and more later succession species, just for the whole, for the soil, and also just to tap into um, our DNA and our wisdom and our relationship with those longer, slower growing plants.
Beautiful. And I just would add, there's a connection here between there's the garden and there's your farm, but then there's also the cook. And so we need to give a shout out to all the cooks and all the creative recipes and all the juices and everything, because, there's amazing blends that can be made. This woman, Stephanie Sison, who grows at Biodynamic Botanicals, she loves making thistle lemonade. So good. Um, and so there's techniques, there is one step of the synthesis when in the kitchen, we look at the recipes. And for someone who maybe isn't as inclined to be in the garden, planting, which is okay, there is also this side of the food preparation, right? Canning class, but like, yeah, that food preparation and how to make some of these, I guess, less culturally popular plants delicious and seductive, and yeah.
Don't eat raw thistle.
And ask me for my purslane pickle recipe. Once we're done, I'll be happy to share it with you.
Okay, you have any more questions? Anyone else? Well, I guess that's it for the gardening panel. And thank you very much for attending. Thank you for all attending. I've learned a lot.
Me too. Thanks for
Okay.
coming.